My name is Brian S. Bentley. I'm a former Los Angeles police officer. I was a police officer for 10 years, and I spent 8.5 years working at Southwest Division. I did my rookie year at West Los Angeles Division. Currently, I'm a writer, a journalist, and an LAPD critic. I was there when during the O.J. Simpson trial. I was there when my ex-partner, Kevin Gaines, was killed. And I was also part of an extensive investigation. And it was just a horrible time. People aren't interested in hearing about officers' rights being violated when officers violate other people's rights.
Now, you mentioned Kevin Gaines a moment ago. Can you tell us what you know about Kevin Gaines, what type of cop he was, and more about him, the person?
Well, he was a nice person, very nice person, friendly, would help anybody that needed help. The thing that the media failed to mention and talk about is that Kevin Gaines' mother was killed by the LAPD. She had a seizure, diabetic seizure. The police department responded and they thought that she was on drugs, and they handcuffed her and didn't give her medical attention in a timely manner, and she passed away. And there was a lawsuit against the LAPD in which he and his family won. So Kevin Gaines had money before, all the time they talk about he lived above his means. They never mentioned that fact in that lawsuit. Kevin Gaines was just like many of the other officers on the job who didn't conform to the quote-unquote LAPD, the blue. He was harassed, and he may have received some suspension days for minor things that others wouldn't have received. And so, like many other officers, he was angry about that, just as I was. And as a result, he was labeled as a hothead, when basically he was just an average police officer. No, he worked briefly for Suge Knight, just as approximately 100 other officers. Officers were paid $75 an hour to work for Suge Knight. I was asked to work for Suge Knight, which I declined. But a lot of officers did, and they weren't all black officers, and they weren't all from LAPD. So that's one myth. Another thing is that yes, he did. He was living with Suge Knight's estranged wife, okay? And that's another reason, too, where they say he may have been living above his means, okay? He's living with the wife of a millionaire. Of course, he's going to have a little extra more things.
100 million.
Exactly. So the LAPD, and one thing that's interesting about LAPD, not to get off the subject, is whenever there's a complaint made, LAPD's first priority is to find something to discredit the person who is making the complaint. Such as if you go in and make a complaint on an officer, the first thing they'll do is run your record, see if you have any warrants, see if you were arrested, see if you got any tickets, and the first line on that complaint form will be, Alex is in here making this complaint because he has a warrant. And that's why he's angry against the police department. Well, the police department does the same thing when they investigate other officers. And then in this case, when they wanted to clear Detective Lyga, they went after Kevin Gaines' character to assassinate his character first. When you say Kevin Gaines, people automatically think of Rampart. And it's because of what LAPD did to tarnish his name to clear Detective Lyga. From my understanding, he did not have a role in any of the Rampart. He never worked Rampart, as all those other officers did. And as I mentioned before, he worked for Death Row, just like a lot of other officers did. There's no connection with him in the Rampart scandal, absolutely none. He wasn't arrested for drugs. He wasn't partners with any of those guys. And most of what those guys did was on duty in Rampart. They took drugs from drug dealers and allegedly killed people while they were working in Rampart as partners. When I was a rookie, I did my rookie season, what they call probationer, at West LA Division, and Detective Lyga was a training officer. Everybody knew who he was, particularly the black officers, because we were told to watch out for him. that he couldn't be trusted and that he didn't like blacks. I tried to speak to him several times. He never even looked at me. He just continued on his way. And I've never had a conversation with him to the point where I never even looked at him. But his reputation was known throughout the division.
Now, this was back in '89?
This would have been in 90, between 90 and 91, because I was out of the academy, so that it would have been that time. Well, it was told back then in 1990, 1989, there was no secret. It wasn't a bad thing to be a racist if you were in the LAPD. My first training officer told me, my orientation was, my training officer was very nice, very polite. He just told me straightforward, I don't like blacks and I don't like minorities. I don't think that you belong on this job. The only reason you're on this job is because of affirmative action. And my job is not to train you, it's to get rid of you. That was my orientation. Told to me straight up. I went back to West LA Division in somewhere around 1998, or 97, when this shooting occurred, when Detective Lyga shot Kevin Gaines. I walked into the station, into the front area, and Detective Lyga was there. This was shortly after the shooting. Another officer asked him, he was surprised that he was out in the field so recently after the shooting. And he told him that he was cleared right away, that there was never an investigation, that the investigating detective told him that he would clear him and do whatever he could to clear his name, and he was never taken out of the field. That sent an alert, and I've been on this ever since. And I said I would never give up after hearing that. So when I heard this audio, I wasn't really surprised. I wasn't surprised at the content, because I know that's his character. It sounded just like him. The arrogance, the cockiness, the boldness, that was Detective Lyga all the way. So I wasn't surprised by the content. It was disturbing that he made it in front of approximately 38 people who were potentially 38 witnesses. And he felt comfortable enough that these people wouldn't tell on him and that what he was doing was okay. That was disturbing. Also, too, he put these officers' careers in jeopardy because it's against department policy not to report misconduct. So every officer who heard this, who didn't notify internal affairs, should be suspended based on the rules and regulations of LAPD. They all should get at least 3 days for this, for not reporting it. Well, what's interesting about it is all these years, the LAPD and Frank Lyga has been saying it was road rage, that Kevin Gaines was chasing after him, and they came to an intersection and Kevin Gaines was yelling at him, and it was a case of road rage where he pulled out his gun. When you listen to the tape, he says that he saw Kevin Gaines shortly before with another officer in Hollywood, and they stopped and they talked. And he says that's how Kevin Gaines knew who I was. And he repeated it. The day of the shooting, that's how Kevin Gaines knew who I was. So he admits that Kevin Gaines, at the time of the shooting, knew that he was a detective on the police department. How did he know that? That's the question that comes up, is, there must have been some type of dialogue before he shot him.
Okay, so the way I understand it to be is that two cops, not in uniform, both not representing LAPD, are at an intersection at the same time arguing with each other about something that has nothing to do with policing. And Frank Lyga eventually pulls out his gun because he says that Kevin Gaines pulled out his gun.
Well, that's what was said, but Detective Lyga was an he was an on-duty undercover detective at the time. So he had resources, he had the radio, he could have called for backup and called for black and white units. He didn't have to engage Kevin Gaines if it happened the way he said, he did not have to engage him at the time. What wasn't disclosed was later he said that he called and his radio wasn't working. He called for backup, but no one heard him. Those are things that he mentioned later on in the investigation, which I don't believe. He said that Kevin Gaines said words like, "I'm going to cap you," dialogue that you hear on TV, not real game terms. And so, it was fabricated. But in this, and I've always believed, and I worked with Kevin Gaines, I know for a fact he knew who Detective Lyga was. I know his tactics. I know how he would approach this situation tactically. I know that he would not pull out a gun and just point it at somebody. He's trained when you point, you pull out your gun, you're pointing it to shoot, to engage a person. And I know that if he did point a gun, there's no way Detective Lyga would have been able to get off 2 shots without Kevin Gaines getting off 1, and the gun was already pointed at him. You know, it's impossible. And Kevin Gaines was left-handed, and that's another thing. He would have had to reach around this way to do that, and I know he wouldn't do that. At this moment, we don't have proof that Lyga knew who Kevin Gaines was, but we know that Kevin Gaines knew who Detective Lyga was. And also, too, Detective Lyga is a seasoned veteran. He knows what a gang member looks like. He knows the actions of a gang member. Kevin Gaines never looked like a gang member, always sharply dressed, well-groomed. There was nothing about him that said gang member other than he was black. That was it. And Detective Lyga, experienced detective, knew that. The reason this didn't get a thorough investigation, one, was because the investigator was friends with Detective Lyga, still is close friends with Detective Lyga, and that's how the department works. If you have a friend, they got your back. Another thing, there wasn't a thorough investigation of the fear of what the outcome might be. I mean, there's allegations that this was a hit, that if Kevin Gaines is tied to Rampart, Detective Lyga could be tied to Rampart, could be tied to Suge Knight as well. So there are speculations that it could be that Detective Lyga was carrying out a hit. No one wanted to touch this story. The officer, the person that I received the tape from, sent it out to many people, and the written complaint was out there, and they tried to go through the department, and there was no response. At the same time that I received it, no response. No one wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to go in that direction at all. They just wanted to just let it go. So nobody wants to comment on it, and it's just so that it just recently hit the media. Now people feel compelled, they're being forced to make statements about it. So eventually the city council is going to have to say something.
Yeah, you talking about you found a gun in my car. Nobody watched you find shit in my car. You don't know if that stupid bitch did what. I didn't touch her, bro.
Like, Dollar probably be one of the biggest artists today if that wouldn't happen to him. Meek Mills. Meek Mills was working with him before Dollar died, before Meek Mills was signed.